Is your band looking to move to a silent practice or in-ear monitor setup? Do you need a mixer setup that's portable and self-contained, but also scalable enough to handle all of your band's inputs and various monitor mixes? I found myself in both of those situations about 2 years ago, which ultimately resulted in this setup here that I've got in the box. My setup centers around a Behringer XR-18 digital mixer and both the Shure PSM300 and XVive U4 In-Ear system, in addition to an external Linksys router for connecting to the mixer. Those are the essential components of the rig. Everything else is more of a nice-to-have feature to improve portability. The nice-to-haves include firstly an SKB 6-unit shallow rack case for portability and protection. There's an on-stage 1-unit rack drawer to keep all the extra cables and belt packs and accessories. I've also got some aftermarket rack ears for the XR-18 from a shop on Etsy. Those are great because they let you keep the mixer recessed so that you can put the front lid on without removing any cables. And they have some holes in them so you can feed the cables to the back of the case and keep things nice and neat. I've also got a live wire rack mountable power conditioner to keep everything self-contained, as well as some Shure rechargeable batteries, because burning through AA batteries all the time makes me sad. All of that comes at a manageable 43 pounds with the front and rear lid on. So no carts required here. Even a tiny person like me can move it around with ease. So all that portability and weight comes at a cost, however. I've listed the prices of the essentials and the nice-to-haves, and both of those will set you back around $3,200. Most of that price comes from the Shure PSM300, which begs the questions. Why the PSM300, and why do you need both a PSM300 and XVive In-Ear systems? Well, for the first part, I'll say that I've used some of the cheaper megahertz band in-ear systems, and you get what you pay for. The cheaper systems have more noise and dropouts than the Shure, and the PSM300 lets you choose between one stereo mix or having 2 mono channels. For the second question, I'll admit that you don't need both. However, after having them, they both fill different needs in ways that complement each other. Which one I use is a choice of better sound quality and low noise versus lower latency and improved signal reliability. The PSM300 excels in venues or practice settings with a lot of competing wireless signals and with minimal dropouts. It's also analog, so there's near zero latency. That's useful in a live situation where my wireless guitar system and digital effects can already add at least 7 milliseconds of latency or so. The PSM300, like any analog system, has some consistent white noise, which becomes obnoxious during longer home practice settings or low-key jam sessions. That's where the XVive comes in. It's a digital 2.4 gigahertz system with a much lower noise floor. But it is more sensitive to interference than the Shure, and it often cuts out when there are physical obstructions between the transmitter and the receivers. Also, for recording home videos, when I'm moving around a lot between takes to adjust the camera and the like, not being tethered to the computer by headphone cables is an absolute blessing. So to circle back to the cost concern, if you want to go cheaper with a Galaxy in-ear system, you definitely can. Just be prepared for a little more white noise and dropouts. So how has dropping $3,000 worked out for me here? Pretty well, actually. The XR-18 was a great purchase. I got it right before there was a big shortage in 2022, and prices for both new and used jumped a ton when they did become available then. It's got just the right amount of inputs to allow for flexibility in standard small band situations, like adding more drum mics, MP3 tracks, multiple guitars and vocals, etc. I'm glad I went with this over the XR-16 with only 8 XLR inputs and 4 monitor mixes versus 16 dual inputs and 6 monitor mixes on the XR-18. You will need a dual band external Wi-Fi router though. The built-in one is pretty unreliable. And on that note, the router I got was probably overkill for my uses of jam sessions and band practice and very, very small gigs. It doesn't need to be a fast router, just needs to allow enough connections for every band member and whatever friend volunteered to be the front of house engineer. The XR Android app isn't great, but it gets the job done for setting mix levels. Just make sure your phone has a large enough screen to do anything. Otherwise, it's hard to poke around. For any live sound mixing beyond just setting the levels, like EQ, creating new monitor mixes, adding effects, you'll definitely want to connect through a computer. It's just so much easier on the desktop application with a mouse and keyboard. Lastly, even though I'm not in a band at the moment, I'm still getting solid use out of this rig for home recording. I obviously didn't buy it for this purpose, but it recently replaced my trusty Scarlett 2i2, and it's hard to imagine going back to this little guy now. I can load different presets with configured gain staging and outputs based off the situation without turning any knobs, without unplugging or plugging in any cables. For example, do I want my output to come from my DAW, or am I just monitoring? Or I can have dedicated input channels staged for each instrument, depending on their pickup output. I can also have different channels immediately ready for my bass coming in through either a high-Z instrument cable versus bass coming in from a balanced DI output. And lastly, as mentioned already, it lets me practice at home without my head being tethered to the computer. So those are my thoughts on this compact digital mixing and monitoring rig. Thanks for sticking around, and let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments below.